The heat was searing. Caleb kicked a pebble along the dirt road while holding a torn plastic bag. It was full of cans that he had picked up along the way. The kid, only 12 years old, looked much older. Life was not easy, and he already knew what responsibility was from an early age. His worn sandals kicked up dust with each step, and sweat ran down his forehead, sticking his t-shirt to his body. He looked at the ground, but always found a way to observe whoever passed by. It was always the same thing, a slightly crooked look, a mixture of pity and distrust. Caleb didn't care anymore. He knew what they thought. Another poor kid trying to survive. The school? That was far from the plans. Who has time to study when the refrigerator at home is almost always empty? Arriving at the gas station, Caleb took a deep breath. There, Mr. Thompson, the manager, was already in the corner, talking to a customer. He tried not to attract attention as he approached the trash cans to look for more cans, but the old man wouldn't let anything go by. "Caleb, I already told you not to hang around here for too long," shouted Thompson, adjusting his sunglasses on his nose. "I'm just getting some cans, Mr. Thompson. I'm on my way," replied Caleb with a nervous smile, trying to avoid further confusion. Thompson mumbled something to the customer and ignored Caleb again. The boy took advantage of the respite, grabbed some more cans, and got out of there as quickly as he could, with the heavy bag hitting his leg with each step. When he got home, Caleb opened the little rusty gate. The house was small. The walls were peeling, and the windows made an annoying noise every time the wind blew. Inside, her mother, Grace, sat at the kitchen table, a stack of bills in front of her. The expression on her face said it all. "What's up, Caleb? Did you achieve enough today?" he asked, without even looking up from the papers. "Not much," he replied, emptying the bag in a corner near the door. "But tomorrow I'll get more, I promise." Grace let out a long sigh, running a hand through her hair. He took out a letter and dangled it in front of him. "Another electricity bill. 3 days, Caleb." After that, they cut everything. The boy lowered his head, feeling the weight of the situation. "I wanted to say something that would put her at ease, but I had no words." He knew that deep down they were both lost. Later, locked in the cramped room, Caleb took out his old notebook and began to draw. The tip of the pencil slid across the paper, creating the image of a big house with huge windows, a beautiful garden, nothing like the house where they lived. It was his dream, and drawing was the only thing that made him forget the hardness of life. But he knew that just dreaming wouldn't change anything. And the next morning, Caleb made a decision. He was going to go back to the gas station, get more cans, and do whatever he needed to help his mother. The next day, the sun had barely risen, but Caleb was already on the road again. Dust rose from his worn sandals as he quickened his pace. In my mind, only one thing: get more cans and save some money before the day is over. The torn bag dangled in his hand, still half empty, but he hoped to return home with something better this time. When the gas station came into view, Caleb already knew what to expect. Thompson would probably be there, looking like he always did, grumbling about him walking around too much. But Caleb didn't care. He needed to continue. As soon as he arrived, the sound of an engine caught his attention. A black car, shining as if it had just left the factory, slowly parked in front of the pumps. It was the kind of car Caleb had only seen in movies. The silver wheels shined so brightly that he could almost see himself in them. He stood there watching as the driver, a man in a neat suit, got out of the car, adjusting his tie. "Must be rich, huh?" Caleb muttered, almost without realizing it. The man entered the convenience store without even looking around. Caleb, who was already used to being invisible, turned to look for more cans in the trash cans. That's when he saw something that didn't seem right. A man with a cap pulled down was crouched near the car. His movements were quick, almost stealthy, moving something underneath the vehicle. Caleb squinted his eyes, trying to understand what was happening. It was then that he saw it. The guy was messing with the brake wires. It was sabotage. Caleb's heart started to beat faster. He froze in place, not knowing what to do. The man finished what he was doing and stood up, his eyes meeting Caleb's for a second. It was enough to give the boy goosebumps. The guy then disappeared, turning the corner of the building. Caleb swallowed hard, trying to catch his breath. He looked at the car, the man in the suit still inside the store. What was he doing now? Would you shut up and let the guy drive away? Or would you take a risk and say something? I can't stay quiet, he thought. And before his courage faded, Caleb ran to the car and started screaming. Hey boy, your brakes! Someone tampered with your car's brakes. His voice was loud, almost desperate. The man in the suit walked out of the store with a confused expression. He looked at the car, then at Caleb and frowned. What are you talking about, boy? He asked, clearly irritated. I saw, Caleb insisted, pointing to the place where the other man was crouched. He touched the brakes. Don't drive that car. Before the man could respond, a police car drove down the street and Caleb started waving like crazy. The police officers parked, getting out of the car to understand what was happening. The man in the suit, Mr. William Carter, began to explain everything while Caleb detailed what he had seen. The police officers looked at each other seriously, and one of them confirmed, "Let's check that out. It looks like the boy is telling the truth." Caleb stood by, watching the officers examine the car. Adrenaline was running through his veins. Had I done the right thing? Or had I gotten into trouble? Caleb stood in the corner, nervous, while the police analyzed the car. He tried to look calm, but his hands were shaking. Mr. Carter, the man in the suit, was impatient, pacing back and forth, casting curious glances at the boy. Is he sure of what he saw? Carter asked one of the officers, his eyebrows furrowed. It appears so, sir, replied one of the officers, standing up after inspecting the brakes. There was manipulation here. If I had driven that car, well, it could have been fatal. Carter's eyes widened, now clearly shaken. He turned to Caleb, who was still standing with the bag of cans in his hand, looking small compared to the whole situation. Are you sure you saw who did this? Carter insisted, his voice softer now. Caleb nodded, pointing in the direction where the man in the cap had disappeared. He went that way, but he must have already left. The officers took Caleb's statement, asking him to repeat the description of the suspect. Caleb did the best he could, but it was hard to remember all the details with so much going on in his head. After the officers finished, Carter approached again. This time, his expression was completely different. He no longer had that suspicious look. Instead, he seemed grateful. You saved me today, kid, Carter said, crossing his arms. What's your name? Caleb, he replied a little awkwardly. He wasn't used to adults talking to him like that. Well, Caleb, do you realize what you just did? Carter looked at him as if he were an adult, not a 12-year-old boy with torn clothes. You saved me from a terrible accident. I owe you a lot. Caleb opened his mouth to respond, but didn't know what to say. He had never heard anyone say they owed him anything. I just did what needed to be done, he murmured, looking at the ground. Carter smiled, a genuine smile, and patted Caleb on the shoulder before returning to the car, now safe after the repairs carried out by the police. Caleb watched the scene in a daze. When everything seemed to be over, he picked up the bag of cans and started to head home, his heart still racing. He had no idea how this simple attitude would change his life. On the way back, the heat was still strong, but Caleb didn't even seem to feel it. All he could think about was the whole scene. Had I really helped someone important? Would it end there or bring more problems for him and his mother, Grace? Arriving home, Caleb carefully pushed open the gate, the sound of scrap metal creaking echoing through the small house. Grace was in the kitchen, as always, surrounded by papers. When she saw Caleb enter, she took a quick look and went back to the documents. "Did you bring anything?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the bills. "A few cans, but that's not what matters now, Mum." Grace looked up, suspicious. She knew that tone of Caleb's voice. Something had happened. "What is it now, Caleb?" he asked, crossing his arms. Caleb took a deep breath. He knew explaining wouldn't be easy. He sat down on the old chair and began to tell everything, from the luxury car to the suspicious man and the police officers. Grace listened to everything in silence, but the expression on her face became more and more worried. When Caleb finished, she shook her head, clearly uncomfortable. "Did you speak to the police?" "Caleb, we already have enough problems. You know these things always end up being left over for us." Her voice had a tone of frustration and fear. "Mom, I had to do something," Caleb replied, trying to explain. "The man could have died." Grace sighed, running a hand over her face. She didn't want to fight, but she also didn't know how to deal with more problems. Caleb was silent. He wanted his mother to understand, but he knew her worries weren't for nothing. When night fell, Caleb went to his room and opened his notebook. He took the pencil and started to draw another house. This time, it was bigger, with a garden full of trees and huge windows that let in the light. While drawing, he felt something different. For the first time, he felt a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. The next morning, the sound of tires on the dirt road caught Caleb's attention. He was sitting in front of the house, drawing in his worn notebook. He raised his head and saw a shiny black car parking right in front of the gate. It was the same luxury car as Mr. Carter. Caleb's heart quickened. He put down his pencil and stood, staring as the car door opened. Mr. William Carter came down with the same elegance as the day before, but this time he seemed less formal. He was wearing a dress shirt without a tie, and the smile on his face seemed sincere. Caleb ran to the gate, holding the rust in his hands. He knew his mother, Grace, wouldn't like this at all. "Good morning, Caleb," Carter said, stopping at the gate and looking around. "Is your mother at home?" Caleb hesitated. Grace wasn't very good at receiving visitors, especially from strangers, especially if they were rich. He looked inside the house and saw her shadow moving in the kitchen. "Yes," he replied, not knowing if that was a good idea. Before he could say anything else, Grace appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel. When he saw Carter, he stopped walking. Her expression was a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "Can I help?" he asked, his voice a little cold, crossing his arms. Carter took a step forward, undeterred by Grace's hard gaze. "I'm William Carter. Your son saved me yesterday. I almost had an accident because of a saboteur. I came here to thank you." Grace looked from Caleb to Carter, still not letting her guard down. "To thank? Well, he just did what he thought was right," she said, trying to quickly cut the conversation short. "But you didn't need to come here for that." Carter smiled slightly, noticing her resistance. "I insist. It's not every day that someone has the courage to do what he did. And to be honest, I want to help too. Do you guys need something? I can reciprocate." Grace's gaze hardened even more. She stepped forward, coming face to face with Carter. "Look, sir, with all due respect, we don't need charity. My son did what was right because that's how I raised him, not because I expected anything in return." Caleb looked at his mother, pressing his hands against the gate. He knew she was proud, but this time she seemed to be exaggerating. Carter, however, didn't seem angry. He just nodded, understanding. "I respect that, Grace," he replied calmly, using her name for the first time. But sometimes accepting help is not a sign of weakness. It's an opportunity. Grace frowned suspiciously, but before she could respond, Caleb interrupted. "Mom, maybe we should listen to him, just listen." His voice was low, almost a request. Grace looked at her son. His face had that look of someone who was tired of seeing things go wrong. She sighed, relaxing her shoulders a little. "It's true. Come in, but I don't promise anything." Carter smiled and followed Grace into the kitchen. He sat at the table, observing the simple surroundings. The old furniture, the walls with peeling paint. You could see that life there was not easy. "Well, like I said, I want to help," Carter began. "I have a company, and I need someone I trust to take care of some things at my house. I thought maybe you might be interested." Grace raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you trying to say?" "A job, Grace. Something stable with fixed hours. I can guarantee transportation and a good salary. It's a way of giving back for what your son did for me." Caleb stood on the edge of his seat, waiting for his mother's response. He knew Grace was hesitating. She hated being dependent on anyone, especially someone who seemed so far above them. "I don't know," Grace began, but Carter interrupted her. "Think of it as a partnership. You work, and I have the security of knowing that my house is in good hands. It's not charity, it's a fair exchange." Grace was silent for a long time. Finally, he sighed. "I'm going to think. I don't promise anything." Carter smiled again, pleased with the answer. "That's all I ask. Think calmly. And Caleb, you are a special boy. Never let anyone make you think otherwise." Caleb blushed but smiled. He knew that this visit could change everything. Grace spent the rest of the day thinking about William Carter's proposal. Sitting at the table, staring at the stacked bills, she felt the weight of each choice. Accepting meant giving up part of the pride that had kept her standing until now, but it could also be the chance to give Caleb a better life. Meanwhile, Caleb couldn't contain his excitement. He ran around the yard with his sketchbook in his hands, doodling new ideas for houses. Carter's visit seemed to have ignited something inside him, a fire he didn't even know existed. "Mom, do you think he was serious about work?" asked Caleb, stopping drawing to look at Grace. "Yes, but that doesn't mean we should accept it, Caleb. These things never come without some kind of price," Grace replied, with her usual defensive tone. Caleb sighed, frustrated. He knew his mother was proud, but he couldn't understand why she was so resistant to something that seemed so good. Maybe it's the kind of chance we always wanted, Mom. Just this once, it could be different. He spoke softly, almost afraid of contradicting her. Grace looked at her son, his eyes shining with hope. It was hard to ignore that. Caleb had always been strong, but she knew life had been too hard for him. Maybe she should consider it, if only for him. 2 days later, as Caleb scribbled in his notebook, a familiar noise caught his attention. The same black car was back. Caleb ran to the door, with Grace close behind. Carter got out of the car with the same friendly smile and a folder under his arm. "I thought I'd stop by to see if you've reached a decision," he said directly, but without seeming to pressure. Grace crossed her arms and sighed deeply. "Look, I thought a lot, and maybe I should try, but I want to make it clear that I do not accept charity. If I go to work, I want to be treated like anyone else." Carter smiled, pleased. "That's exactly what I hope, Grace. It will be a job like any other, and you will have my respect." He opened the folder and took out some papers, explaining the conditions of the job, taking care of his house, organizing the space, and making sure everything was in order. The salary was more than Grace imagined. Caleb heard everything from afar, trying to hide his smile. He knew it could change their lives. and he just hoped nothing would go wrong. On Monday morning, a car arrived to pick up Grace. Caleb stood at the door, watching his mother get into the vehicle with a mix of anxiety and determination. She looked more put together than he had seen her in years. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope that things would get better. As Grace went to her first day at her new job, Caleb went back to his sketchbook. This time, he didn't just draw big, beautiful houses. He designed a house that looked like theirs, but renovated, stronger, more welcoming, a real home. When Grace returned in the evening, she looked tired but different. There was something on her face, a relief that Caleb hadn't seen in a long time. "What's up, Mum? How it was?" he asked anxiously. Grace smiled slightly, dropping her bag on the chair. "It was good, Caleb. It's real work, you know, and Mr. Carter, he's a good boss. I think it will work." Caleb felt joy explode inside him. He ran and hugged his mother, something that hadn't happened in a long time. Grace returned the hug, squeezing him tightly. "This is just the beginning, Mom. Everything will be fine," he said with conviction. Grace sighed, holding back tears. For the first time, she believed her son's words. The days began to pass differently at Caleb's house. The routine, previously marked by worries and heavy silences, now had a little more lightness. Grace went to work at Mr. Carter's house every morning, and each time she came back, she looked a little less worn out. "How was today, Mum?" Caleb asked every night as she dropped her purse on the kitchen chair. "It was tough, but good. Mr. Carter is demanding but fair," she replied, often accompanying the sentence with a small smile. For Caleb, every positive word from his mother was fuel. He spent his days drawing, collecting cans, and dreaming about the future. From time to time, he even found himself imagining what he would do if he could actually study architecture. The dream seemed distant, but less impossible than before. One afternoon, while Grace was still at work, Caleb heard the sound of footsteps in the backyard. He looked out the window and saw Mr. Carter standing at the gate, holding something in his hands. "Can I come in, Caleb?" he asked, with a friendly smile. "Of course," replied the boy, running to open the gate. Carter entered, handing a heavy book into Caleb's hands. It was an architecture book, with thick covers and detailed images of modern houses and impressive designs. "I thought you'd like it," Carter said, watching the boy's reaction. Caleb's eyes lit up as he flipped through the pages. It was as if every drawing and every floor plan spoke directly to him. He looked at Mr. Carter with a huge smile. I don't even know how to thank you," said Caleb, his voice breaking. "You don't need to thank me, Caleb. I just want you to know that talent, when well developed, can change lives, and I believe you have this talent." The words echoed in Caleb's head for the rest of the day. He couldn't put the book down, not even when Grace came home from work. "What is that?" she asked, seeing her son with the book in his lap. "It was Mr. Carter who gave it. He said I can use my talent to change our lives," Caleb replied with a sparkle in his eyes. Grace looked at the book, then at Caleb. She didn't say anything at the time, but as her son leafed through the pages, she felt a mix of pride and fear. "I knew he had big dreams, but the world wasn't always kind to those who came from where they came from." The next day, Caleb decided to go to the local community center. He had heard about a drawing workshop being held there and thought it might be a good idea to give it a try. When he arrived, he was greeted by a woman named Catherine, who appeared to be the coordinator. "Do you like to draw?" she asked, noticing the notebook that Caleb was holding tightly. "Yes, I draw houses," he replied, shyly showing one of the pages. Catherine was impressed with the lines and level of detail. "You have a gift, Caleb. Have you ever thought about taking this seriously?" she said with an encouraging smile. Caleb shrugged. He had never thought that something he did as a hobby could actually be taken seriously. But her words, combined with Carter's, planted a new idea in his mind. When he returned home, Caleb told Grace everything. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had something to fight for. Maybe I can do something big, Mom. Maybe this is the beginning of everything, he said, with a mixture of hope and determination. Grace looked at her son, feeling her heart sink. She didn't want him to deceive himself, but she also couldn't put out the flame that was beginning to shine in him. So let's go ahead, Caleb. But remember, everything we achieve comes with hard work. Don't give up. Caleb smiled, feeling a confidence he had never felt before. He knew the road would be long, but for the first time that didn't scare him. Caleb's days began to change in surprising ways. Every afternoon, he went to the community center to participate in drawing workshops organized by Catherine. There, he found a space where he could unleash his creativity without being judged. Every line he made on paper seemed to open another door to a world he never thought he could belong to. "Oh, Caleb, you have an incredible talent," said Catherine, always smiling as she looked at the boy's drawings. "Have you ever thought about participating in a competition?" The idea left Caleb disconcerted. He had never imagined showing his drawings to anyone other than his mother, or now, Catherine. A contest seemed too big, almost impossible. "I don't know. I don't think I'm good enough for this," he replied, scratching the back of his head. "Trust me, you are. Let's prepare your most special design and send it. It doesn't hurt to try, right?" Caleb nodded, still uncertain. But deep down, something in him wanted to believe Catherine's words. Maybe he actually had a chance. Meanwhile, at Mr. Carter's house, Grace was also beginning to find stability. The work was tiring, but it gave her a relief she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she could pay some bills without having to count her coins down to the last penny. Carter was a fair boss, always polite and respectful, and this made her work with dedication. "How's Caleb doing?" Carter asked one afternoon while Grace was tidying up the living room. "He's excited. He's going to a community center. Draw all day long. I've never seen him like this, so hopeful," Grace replied with a small smile. "I'm glad to hear that. Caleb is special, Grace. He deserves a chance to show the world what he can do." Grace agreed silently. "I was still scared of where this would all lead, but I couldn't deny that the change in Caleb was visible." At the community center, Caleb worked on the drawing that Catherine had suggested for the contest. It was a house like he always imagined, big, with huge windows, surrounded by trees and gardens, but this time he added something special. In the corner of the house, he drew a swing hanging from a tree, something he always dreamed of having as a child. When she finished, Catherine looked at the drawing with eyes full of wonder. This is incredible, Caleb. Let's send it right now." She took a photo of the drawing, filled out the online application, and sent it all in before Caleb had time to doubt himself. He watched the shipment with a knot in his stomach. It was the first time that his work would be seen by anyone other than the people who knew him. "Now we wait," said Catherine, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You did something beautiful here, Caleb. I'm sure they'll realize that." That night, Caleb told Grace about the contest. He was nervous but hopeful. Grace listened carefully, feeling a mixture of pride and fear. She knew the world wasn't always fair, but she also knew Caleb was putting his whole soul into that dream. "What if I don't win, Mum?" he asked, his voice low. "It doesn't matter whether you win or lose, Caleb. The important thing is that you tried. And just by trying, you're already way ahead of where you were before." Those words stuck in Caleb's head as he lay in bed that night. He knew his mother was right. Trying was already a huge step, and for the first time, he felt like he could do something big, even if no one believed in him before. The days seemed to drag by as Caleb anxiously awaited the results of the contest. Every time I came back from the community center, the first thing I did was ask Catherine if she had any news. "Not yet, Caleb. These things take time, but don't worry. You did something incredible," she said, trying to calm him down. But Caleb couldn't help it. He daydreamed about the possibility of his drawing being chosen, of finally proving that he was more than the poor kid who picked up cans. He wanted to show himself, Grace, and even Mr. Carter, that he was capable of something great. One afternoon, Caleb was sitting at the kitchen table drawing in his notebook when he heard Grace call him. "Caleb, there's a letter for you here. It's from the contest." His heart almost stopped. He ran to his mother, who was holding a large envelope with the contest logo stamped on the corner. Caleb's hands shook as he ripped open the envelope. "What's up, Caleb?" "What does it say?" asked Grace, her voice full of expectation. Caleb pulled the paper out and began reading it out loud. "Congratulations, Caleb. Your design was selected as a finalist in the Young Architects of the Future competition." He stopped in disbelief. "Mom, I'm a finalist!" Grace let out a laugh of relief and pride, hugging her son tightly. "I always knew you had something special, Caleb. I just didn't know the world would see it so quickly." Caleb smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that he had never felt before. For the first time, he felt recognized. The next day, he ran to the community center to tell Catherine the news. She was radiant. "I knew! Caleb, this is just the beginning." "Now that you are a finalist, they will exhibit your drawing at the main event. And who knows, maybe you'll win the grand prize." "Grand prize? What is it?" he asked, curious. "A scholarship to study architecture at a renowned school and an internship at a local architecture firm." Caleb was speechless. This was much bigger than he could imagine, but at the same time, the idea scared him. He came from such a humble life, and the world Catherine was describing seemed like a dream too far away. I don't know if I can, Catherine." His voice was full of doubt. "Yes, you can, Caleb. You've already made it this far. Trust yourself." Meanwhile, Grace was also starting to believe that things were changing. At work, Mr. Carter noticed that she was more excited than usual. "Any good news, Grace?" he asked, curious. "My son, Caleb. He is a finalist in an architecture competition." "Who knew, right?" she replied with a shy smile. Carter smiled back, genuinely happy for the family. "He deserves it, and you too. You both have a bright future ahead of you." Grace was silent for a moment, emotional. She never imagined she would hear something like this, especially from someone like Carter. When Caleb returned home that night, he found Grace in the kitchen with a simple cake she had made. It was rare to have something like this, but Grace wanted to celebrate. "This is just the beginning, Caleb. You're changing our story," she said, while they were eating together. Caleb looked at his mother, feeling that for the first time, she was also starting to believe that they could have something more. He knew he still had a long way to go, but now he wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. The day of the finalists' presentation arrived faster than Caleb expected. He barely slept the night before, anxiety making him restless. Grace was also nervous, but she did everything she could to give her son confidence. "You just need to be you, Caleb. Nobody draws like you, and they're going to see that," she said, adjusting the clean shirt he was wearing, one of the few more presentable clothes they had. The event took place in the city's cultural center, a place Caleb had never set foot in before. When he and Grace arrived, they were impressed by the size of the place. The entrance was decorated with posters of the finalists, and there, right in the middle, was his name, Caleb Matthews. "Do you see this, Mother? My name is there," he said, pointing with a smile that lit up his face. "Okay, Caleb, and he's where he deserves to be," Grace replied, feeling a sense of pride that almost made her cry. Inside the hall, the finalists' drawings were displayed on large panels. Caleb recognized his from afar, the house with huge windows, the garden full of trees and the hanging swing. He approached, his eyes shining as he saw his work there, framed as if it were a work of art. "Is that yours?" asked a female voice behind him. Caleb turned around and saw a woman in a blazer and a friendly smile. She seemed to be one of the organizers. "Yes, ma'am, it's mine," he replied a little awkwardly. "It's incredible. You look very mature for your age. Have you ever thought about being an architect?" she asked, impressed. "Yes, I want. That's my dream," Caleb said, feeling confidence growing within him. The woman smiled and gestured for him to join the other finalists on stage. The event was about to start. As Caleb took the stage, Grace watched from the audience, her heart racing. She never imagined seeing her son there, so confident, so full of hope. Sitting next to her was William Carter, who had made a point of showing up. "He's doing well, Grace. You must be proud," he said, watching Caleb closely. "More than you imagine," replied Grace with her eyes fixed on her son. On stage, each finalist had the chance to talk about their drawing. When Caleb's turn came, he took the microphone with shaking hands, but his voice came out steady. "This drawing is how I imagine a real house. Not just a place to live, but a home where you feel safe, where you have space to dream. I wanted something that was beautiful and welcoming, something my mum and I always dreamed of having." His words drew warm applause from the audience, and Grace felt the tears flow. For the first time, she saw Caleb as more than a boy. He was growing up, becoming someone who had a lot to offer the world. After the presentations, the judges met to decide the winner. The suspense was almost unbearable. Caleb tried to look calm, but his hands were sweating and he could barely stand still. Finally, one of the judges came on stage with an envelope. He looked at the audience, gave a short speech about talent and dedication, and then announced, "The winner of the Young Architects of the Future competition is Caleb Matthews." Caleb's world stopped. He blinked, not believing what he had heard. Applause and screams filled the room, and Grace ran to the stage, hugging her son so tightly it seemed like she would never let go. "You did it, Caleb! You did it!" she said between tears. Carter, who was watching everything from the audience, also applauded with a satisfied smile on his face. He knew that moment was just the beginning for Caleb. Caleb received the prize, a full scholarship and an internship at a renowned company in the city. But more than that, he felt he had gained something that money couldn't buy: the recognition that he was capable of changing his future. As he and Grace walked home that night, they both knew their lives would never be the same. Caleb spent the next few days in a mix of euphoria and nervousness. Winning the contest brought a wave of attention he had never experienced before. People from the community started stopping him on the street, praising his drawings and the talent that was finally being recognized. "Hey, Caleb," called one of the neighbors as he passed by with the notebook under his arm. "Congratulations, boy. I knew you would go far." "Thank you, sir," Caleb replied awkwardly, but with a smile he couldn't hide. Even with all eyes on him, Caleb was still the same boy who kicked rocks along the dirt road and collected cans to help his mother. But now there was something different: hope. At Mr. Carter's house, Grace also felt the winds of change. Her job as a housekeeper was steady, and her boss made a point of always asking about Caleb. "Oh, so, how is he dealing with all this?" Carter asked while drinking coffee on the porch. "He's excited, but still nervous. It's a lot at once, you know," replied Grace, placing the teapot on the table. "This is normal. Great opportunities always come with great responsibilities, but trust me, Grace, your son has what it takes to handle this." Grace smiled slightly. Even though she was still afraid, She was beginning to believe that Carter was right. A few days later, Caleb received a call that left him speechless. It was from the architecture firm that offered the internship as part of the award. "Caleb Matthews," said the voice on the other end of the line. "This is Amanda Collins, Horizon Studio Manager. We are very excited to work with you." Caleb could barely respond. He just shook his head, even though he knew the person on the other side couldn't see him. "Thank you, Mom. I don't even know what to say." His voice was choked. "Just say you're ready to start. We have big plans for you, Caleb." When he hung up the phone, he ran to tell Grace the news. "Mother, they called me. I'm starting the internship next week." Grace hugged him tightly, and this time it was she who couldn't hold back her tears. "I knew you could do it, Caleb. I always knew." The first day in the studio was something Caleb would never forget. The building was huge, with glass walls that reflected the sky. He entered nervously, with his hands sweating, but was greeted by Amanda, who had a welcoming smile. "Welcome, Caleb. We will introduce you to the team and show you how our process works." He was taken on a tour of the office, where he saw detailed models, huge screens with digital projects, and professionals who seemed to work with passion. Every detail made Caleb's eyes shine. He knew this was where he wanted to be. Amanda introduced him to a mentor, the main architect, who was impressed by the boy's story. "I've heard a lot about you, Caleb. I can't wait to see what you create here." Caleb spent the day absorbing everything from the techniques to the software he had never seen before. When he returned home that night, he could barely contain his excitement. "Mom, it was incredible. They have everything there, models, computers, everything I ever dreamed of," he said, while Grace listened to him with a smile. "Then enjoy, Caleb. This is just the beginning." That night, Caleb took out his notebook and started drawing. But this time, he didn't just draw a house. He drew a future, buildings, parks, and even what looked like a school. He knew he still had a long way to go, but now he wasn't afraid. For the first time, he believed he could turn his drawings into reality. The excitement of the first day soon gave way to a reality that Caleb hadn't expected. The work at the architecture studio was harder than he imagined. Despite his enthusiasm, he felt that he had a lot to learn, and that everyone there seemed to know more than him. "Caleb, try adjusting these angles here," said the mentor, pointing to the computer screen where Caleb was working on a 3D model. "Do you see? It is important to align every detail." Caleb nodded, concentrated, but his hands shook a little as he tried to correct it. The program was much more complex than anything he had used before. He took a deep breath and continued, reminding himself that he was there to learn. At lunchtime, Caleb sat alone with his sketchbook. He scribbled down some ideas while listening to the other interns' conversations. They talked about architecture schools, international projects, and trips Caleb could only imagine. "What's up, Caleb?" asked one of the interns, a tall boy named Ethan. "You're doing well, huh? Where are you from?" Caleb hesitated for a moment. He didn't know how to tell his story without sounding out of place. "Oh, I'm from right here. I started drawing at home, you know," he replied, trying to sound casual. Ethan raised his eyebrows, impressed. "Serious? No college, no course? Man, this is incredible. You have real talent." Caleb smiled, relieved. He was used to being underestimated, but hearing praise like that, especially from someone who seemed to know so much, was a boost of confidence. After work, Caleb returned to the community center. Catherine was still his biggest supporter and always wanted to know how he was doing. "So, Caleb, how was today?" she asked while looking at his new drawings. "It was tough, but I think I'm learning. There are a lot of things I don't know, but I'm trying," he replied, a little embarrassed. Catherine smiled, placing her hand on his shoulder. "It's normal to feel this way at first, Caleb. No one is born knowing everything. The important thing is that you are there trying. That's already a victory." Her words stuck with Caleb as he walked home that night. He knew Catherine was right, but it was still difficult to feel up to everything that was happening. Grace, on the other hand, also faced her own challenges. Work in the Carter household was steady but exhausting. Despite this, she made a point of always having the energy to listen to Caleb's stories at the end of the day. "Mum, today I made a model with recyclable materials. It wasn't perfect, but my mentor said that for a first project, it's great," he said excitedly. Grace smiled, drying her hands on the tea towel. "See, Caleb, you're growing. Every day is a chance to improve." She felt pride, but also concern. He knew that his son's path was full of challenges, and he didn't want him to get overwhelmed. But at the same time, seeing Caleb so motivated gave her the strength to continue. Over the weekend, Carter showed up at their house with a surprise. He brought a set of professional drawing materials, rulers, pencils, high-quality paper, and even a tilting table for Caleb to work on. "I thought you might need this to continue developing your talent," Carter said, handing over the materials. Caleb gaped, not knowing what to say. "Mr. Carter, I don't even know how to thank you," he began, but Carter interrupted him. "You don't need to thank me, Caleb. Just promise that you will use this to achieve your dreams." Grace watched everything with a discreet smile. Although she still had her reservations, she knew Carter was genuinely interested in helping. That night, Caleb started working on a new project with the materials Carter brought. He spent hours at the tilt table, drawing perfect lines and dreaming of the buildings he could one day build. While looking at the notebook full of possibilities, he thought about everything that had happened so far. The road was still long, but for the first time, he felt he was prepared to face any challenge. The weeks turned into months, and Caleb began to find his groove in the architecture studio. He learned how to use the tools, absorbed every tip from his mentor, and little by little gained confidence. But as with any journey, not everything was easy. One day, while working on a collaborative project with other interns, Caleb realized he still felt out of place. The others chatted animatedly about elite schools and international travel, while he remained silent. "So, Caleb, are you going to try architecture school next year?" Ethan asked, curious. Caleb hesitated. He wanted to, but he knew money was still an issue. Even with the competition scholarship, he would have to deal with other expenses. "I don't know yet. Maybe if everything goes well," he replied, trying to hide his insecurity. Ethan patted him on the back. "Dude, you're already one step ahead of us. It's here because it's good, don't forget that." Ethan's words helped, but the feeling of inadequacy continued to haunt Caleb. He knew he was talented, but part of him still felt like the poor kid who picked up cans on the street. At the community center, Catherine noticed that Caleb seemed more thoughtful than usual. "What's going on, Caleb? You don't look the same as before," he asked, pulling up a chair next to him. "It's just... sometimes I think I don't belong in this world, you know," he confessed. "Everyone there has so much experience, so much, and I only have my drawings and luck." Catherine held his shoulder firmly. "Caleb, luck didn't put you where you are. It was his talent and his determination. Don't let anyone, not even yourself, convince you otherwise." Her words reignited something inside Caleb. He realized that, despite the difficulties, he had achieved much more than he imagined possible. At work, Carter also started paying more attention to Caleb's progress. He invited Grace and her son to dinner at his home, something that surprised them. "I want to show you what Caleb has been doing. The boy is a natural talent, Grace, and deserves to be recognized." Grace, although a little suspicious, accepted. It was hard to deny that Carter had been one of the reasons their lives had improved so much. That night, Carter showed off one of Caleb's designs to some important guests. It was a simple model, but it showed his creative vision, a sustainable school with green areas and open spaces. "That's a 12-year-old's job," Carter said proudly as everyone looked on in awe. Grace watched from the corner, trying to hold back her tears. Seeing Caleb being praised by people she never imagined meeting was surreal. "He's special, Grace, and with support you can go a long way," said Carter, noticing her emotion. "I know. I just hope he continues to believe that too," she replied with a shy smile. Back in the studio, Caleb began to excel in bigger projects. One day, the mentor called him to talk. "Caleb, we have an opportunity here. A client wants a design proposal, and I want you to present your idea. Check it out?" Caleb was speechless. He never imagined he would have the chance to lead something so important. But at the same time, he felt the weight of responsibility. He is sure?" he asked, trying to hide his nervousness. "Absolute. You're ready, Caleb." He took a deep breath and accepted. He spent the next few days working on the project, putting everything he had learned and all the passion he felt for drawing into it. When the day of the presentation arrived, he was nervous but determined. The client listened intently as Caleb explained his vision. In the end, the man smiled. "This boy has a future. I want this design." Caleb almost couldn't believe it. He looked at his mentor, who was smiling approvingly. It was confirmation that he was really on the right path. Caleb told Grace everything, who hugged him tightly. "I always knew you were going to do great things, Caleb. I just needed a chance." Caleb smiled, finally believing it too. He knew there were still challenges ahead, but now he was sure he could face them. Caleb's success began to impact not only his life, but also the community around him. At the community center, more children started showing up to participate in the drawing workshops. Inspired by Caleb's story, they also wanted to discover their talents. "You've become something of a hero around here, you know," said Catherine, laughing, as she saw Caleb helping a little girl adjust the lines in her drawing. "Hero? I don't think it's that much," Caleb replied with a shy smile. "Oh, but yes it is. You showed that it is possible to leave here and achieve something greater. This makes all the difference for them." These words made Caleb realize that his work wasn't just about drawings and projects. He had a chance to be an inspiration, something he never thought he would be. Meanwhile, in the studio, Caleb continued to excel. The design approved by the client was well received and even praised by other architects on the team. Caleb's mentor, seeing his progress, decided to sign him up for a local architecture event for young talent. "Caleb, you deserve to be at this event. It's a chance to showcase your work and make important connections." Caleb swallowed. The idea of presenting his work to so many important people made him nervous, but he knew he had to accept it. "Thanks, I'll do my best," he replied with determination. The event took place in a large auditorium. Caleb, dressed in new clothes that Grace bought especially for the occasion, felt his hands sweating as he held the model he had spent weeks creating. Beside him, other young people were also ready to present their projects. When Caleb's turn came, he took the stage with his heart beating fast. He looked out into the audience and saw Grace and Carter sitting in the front row, smiling with encouragement. He took a deep breath and began. "My name is Caleb Matthews, and this is my project, a sustainable school that integrates nature with education." He explained every detail with passion, showing how green spaces could improve learning and coexistence. When he finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. Caleb walked off the stage with his legs shaking, but the smile on his face showed he knew he had done something special. At the end of the event, Carter met him in the lobby. "Caleb, you were brilliant." "I'm sure this is just the beginning." Grace, who was at the side, nodded. "I've never felt so proud of you, son." Caleb looked at the two, feeling their words sink deep into his heart. He knew he wouldn't have gotten this far without his mother and Carter's support. Back at the community center, Catherine organized a small celebration for Caleb. Children and teenagers showed up with drawings in their hands, asking for tips and advice. Caleb, how do you make the lines so straight?" asked one of the boys. "Do you think I can do this too?" said another child, holding a scribbled notebook. Caleb smiled, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the joy of seeing the impact he was making. "You can do whatever you want. They just need to believe in themselves and never give up, even when it seems difficult." Catherine, observing the scene, smiled. She knew Caleb was changing more than his life. He was planting seeds of hope wherever he went. That night, Caleb sat at his drafting table, now equipped with the materials Carter had given him. He opened his notebook and began to scribble another house. But that time, it wasn't just a house. It was a place where dreams were born, where people found inspiration. It was a reflection of everything he wanted to build, not just with his hands, but with his heart. The months passed quickly, and Caleb's life completely transformed. Now, with a busy routine between the architecture studio, the community center, and new projects, he began to feel like he was finally finding his place in the world. But deep down, he knew he was still the same boy who kicked pebbles along the dirt road, full of dreams and doubts. Grace, in turn, was calmer. The stability of working with Carter and Caleb's success brought a peace she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, the bills were paid, and the house felt more welcoming. Even the previously creaky windows had been repaired. "You know, Mom," Caleb said one night as he drew at the kitchen table, "sometimes I think about everything that happened. It seems like yesterday I was picking up cans at the gas station." Grace laughed, placing a cup of tea in front of him. "And look where you are now." "It wasn't luck, Caleb. It was effort. It was believing when everything seemed impossible." Caleb looked at her, feeling his eyes getting wet. He knew her words were true, but he also knew he wouldn't have gotten there alone. It was her strength that kept him standing when he almost gave up. At the community center, Catherine organized a special screening for Caleb. It was a small gallery with his drawings and the other young people he had inspired. People from the community, including Carter, showed up to celebrate the event. "Caleb, you are an inspiration to all of us," said Catherine, moved. "You showed that talent and determination can change lives." Carter, always discreet, made a point of congratulating the boy. "I'm proud of you, Caleb. You are proof that anything is possible when we believe in ourselves." Caleb, surrounded by children who now looked to him as a role model, felt the weight of his achievements. He knew he still had a long way to go, but now he had something he never had before: confidence. On the last night before he officially began his journey as a full-time intern at the architecture studio, Caleb sat in front of his drafting table. He took out the notebook he had kept since the beginning and flipped through the pages, observing the first scribbles, the crooked houses and the dreams that seemed so distant. On the last blank page, he drew a special house. It had large windows, a garden with a swing, and at the top he wrote, "Home of Dreams." Grace appeared at the bedroom door, watching her son silently. She knew that moment was special, a milestone for everything they had overcome. "It's late, Caleb. Won't you rest?" he asked with a smile. "I'm just finishing one more drawing, Mom. This one is special," he replied, lifting the notebook to show. Grace looked and her eyes lit up. "It's perfect, Caleb. like everything you do. In the following days, Caleb began planning his next move, using his talent to help the community that saw him grow up. He knew his journey wasn't just about him, it was about everyone who believed in him, about every child who needed inspiration and hope. This was the story of Caleb, a boy who turned dreams into reality. A story that reminds us that believing in yourself can change everything. And you, what dreams are still saved? Don't give up on them. Every step counts. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel True Impressive Stories. Here you will find exciting stories that inspire and transform. Until the next story, and remember, there is always time to start over.